In February of 1993, a man calls his wife to tell her he needs to go to the emergency room because he is sick. She begs him to wait for her to get home so they can go together with their young sons. But when the woman gets home, her young son is home alone with her husband nowhere to be found. She calls around and no emergency room has seen him. Days later, his car was found abandoned at the Indianapolis International Airport, but his name wasn't on any flight logs. Soon this turns into one of the craziest missing person cases that didn't get any clues until 23 years later when a person was searching the web doing a genealogy project and they stumbled upon something that didn't make sense. I suggest you stay until the end for a truly shocking twist. And welcome to Dredge Reality, where we talk about crazy facts, mysteries, and scary stories we've dredged from reality. Please subscribe to our channel, hit the bell notification and the like button so you don't miss any content we've dredged up for you. Now let's get to digging. On February 10th, 1993, a woman named Linda woke up in her Fisher, Indiana home and started getting ready for work. Linda didn't realize it, but this would be the day that changed her life forever. Linda was married to a man named Richard Hoagland, and they had two boys, Matthew age 9 and Douglas age 6. Richard was a successful insurance agent and financial advisor. The family was well taken care of and definitely lived a comfortable life. The family had a big house in Fisher, Indiana, which is a city of around 100,000 people in a suburb of Indianapolis. And no wonder why they would want to raise a family there. It's consistently ranked as a top place to live in the United States. With Richard's high income and Linda working as well, they were able to afford that big, nice home and also went on lavish and exotic vacations often. They had been married for 11 years and seemed to have the picture-perfect life. On that Wednesday, February 10th, 1993, Richard and Linda both went on with their normal day, which included both of them going to work and the boys going to school. Linda worked at a medical office in Greenfield, which was approximately a 30-minute drive from Fisher's. The day was going normal when Linda received a phone call around 4:45 p.m. while she was at work. It was from her husband, Richard. He said he didn't feel well and felt like he needed to head to the emergency room. Linda, very worried, told Richard that she wanted to go with him. Richard seemed like he was in a hurry and told her that he had no time to wait. She pleaded with him to wait and that she would take off early, but he refused and got off the phone anyway. Linda didn't realize it, but this was the beginning of the events that would drastically change her and her boys' lives forever. When Linda's shift ended, she headed to pick up her 6-year-old son Douglas from daycare. You see, every day, Richard would pick up their 9-year-old son Matthew from school after he got off of work, and Linda would pick up Douglas after she got off. After picking up Douglas, Linda headed home and arrived around 5:25 p.m. She was shocked because her 9-year-old son Matthew was home alone. She assumed he would be with his father at the emergency room. This definitely gave her a bad feeling, and she knew something was off. At this point, Linda started calling emergency rooms in the local area, seeing if she could figure out where her husband was and if he was okay. But everyone that she called said no one by the name of Richard Hoagland had been at their facility. I mean, it wasn't like Richard to leave their 9-year-old son unsupervised. This was very odd to say the least. Linda, super confused and not understanding what was going on, received another phone call at the home about 15 minutes later at approximately 5:40 p.m., and it was Richard. When Linda answered the phone and heard Richard, she was slightly relieved but still confused, expecting Richard to give her an update and an explanation why he left their son alone. He said something that took her totally by surprise, something totally out of left field. He told her he was calling to say goodbye. He was calling to tell her he was never coming home. Linda, in absolute shock and completely distraught and confused, started asking him why and pleading with him to explain. Richard just kept saying that he couldn't live this way anymore, and he feels like Linda and the boys would be better off without him. Linda continued to plead with him, and the phone went silent, leaving Linda in a confused and devastated state. Then approximately an hour and 45 minutes later, around 7:30 p.m., the phone rings again. Linda answers the phone and it was Richard. This time it sounds like he's in a crowded bus station or airport. He told her the reason he wanted to leave is because he didn't want to go to jail, but giving her no explanation as to why he would be put in jail. He also told her he was never coming back. The call abruptly ended before Linda could respond. Linda and the boys were left just absolutely devastated from this. I mean, not only did they lose their father and husband, but now Linda was left to pay all the bills and raise the boys on her own. Richard had left her with no money, and to add insult to injury, he had left her with a mound of debt she didn't even know about. This put tremendous stress on her and made her fall into a deep depression. She just couldn't understand. Why would he be going to jail? Also, they were mainly a healthy couple with some disagreements about normal couple things, but nothing out of the ordinary. When she thought about it, he had been acting a little distant the week leading up to his disappearance, but she initially chalked it up to her own paranoia. But as you see, unfortunately, her intuition served her correctly. After Richard's disappearance, Linda was left to pick up all the pieces, but his disappearance didn't make any sense. He had left everything of importance behind. He didn't take a toothbrush or any clothes. It was freezing cold in February in Indiana, and he didn't even take a coat. He also left really important paperwork behind, like his passport. Police started investigating Richard's disappearance. They ended up finding his abandoned vehicle a few days later at the Indianapolis International Airport parking lot, but Richard was nowhere to be found. Authorities also checked flight records, and no one by the name of Richard Hoagland had been on any flights, deepening the mystery. Then on February 14th, 1993, Linda receives a collect call from Richard. A collect call isn't commonly used anymore unless it's someone calling from jail. But back in the day, before cell phones were a daily thing, any call from one area code to another was considered long distance and expensive, usually charging someone by the minute. A collect call was a way to pass the charges on to the person you were calling. So basically you would call the number and say your name. That's when the person receiving the call could accept or decline the charges. It would usually say something like, hit 1 to accept or hit 2 to decline. If you accepted, you would be paying a high price. $1 to $2 a minute was around the average in 1993. But Linda didn't care. She was desperate and wanted answers. It was not 100% clear what was said during the phone call, but Linda claims the call was very cryptic. He refused to say where he was, gave no explanation for leaving, and simply told her he was not coming back. Linda received another phone call from Richard on February 15, 1993, with the same kind of result, super vague and cryptic. I mean, why did he even call? Is it possible that he called out of guilt? Or maybe to ensure Linda wasn't trying to track him down? Who knows what he was thinking, but this would be the last time that Linda ever talked to Richard. When Linda received her phone bill, it said the calls were made from Aruba and Venezuela, which was very odd considering police couldn't find any records of him flying. The next time anyone would hear from Richard was on his son's birthdays. In May of 1993, Richard sent his son Matthew a birthday card with $50 in it. In July of 1993, he also sent his son Douglas a card with $50 in it as well. The card to Douglas read, "Doug, have a super birthday. You were a super boy. I love and miss seeing you. Let your mom help spend this money. You might want to put some away. Maybe sometime soon we will get to see each other. I bet I won't even know you. It's been so long. Mind your mother. Bye, Dad." Those were the last words Linda, Matthew, and Douglas would ever hear from their father. He just vanished off the face of the earth. It's truly gut-wrenching hearing these words, knowing it's the last time this 7-year-old boy will ever hear from his father. Richard had seemed to be a successful businessman, but that was just a front that he put on. Linda didn't even know it, but Richard had been lying about his success. In reality, he was struggling financially. He had maxed out all of their credit cards without Linda's knowledge. Richard had even forged Linda's signature to acquire a loan. So not only did he devastate Linda by leaving her and the boys, but he left Linda in substantial debt. So talk about adding insult to injury, but that wasn't it though. The icing on the cake was detectives considered her a suspect in Richard's disappearance. Detectives didn't think Linda had murdered her husband. They thought she was helping hide him though. They believed that Linda knew where Richard was. They considered her a suspect and were very accusatory of her. The detectives said they thought they were carrying out some kind of financial hoax. But Linda claims the detectives alluded a lot to the possibility that Richard was involved in some sort of drug trafficking. So who knows exactly what they were thinking, but she was still on their radar. So not only was Linda going through these months of interrogations by police, she is struggling to pay her mortgage and car payment. She was also having to raise 2 boys all alone. This was extremely stressful for her, and she said she fell into an even deeper depression. Eventually, she had to file for bankruptcy and turn to her parents for financial assistance. During all of this, Linda started to feel as if she was being followed. She noticed that the same people were around when she was out in public. She noticed suspicious vehicles parked close to her home, and her mail had showed signs of being opened and sealed back up. She would come home and notice things out of place, like someone had been inside her home moving things around. Then around this same time period, Linda's father had found a strange-looking device attached to her phone line. It turned out to be a recording device to record her phone conversations. Linda was absolutely terrified. She had become very paranoid. Her thoughts were that Richard had got mixed up with the wrong people and did something wrong. That's why he had to leave. This thought kept Linda in a constant state of worry and paranoia. During all of this, she had to file for bankruptcy. The bank repossessed the family vehicle and foreclosed on their home. With this happening and all the paranoia from being followed, Linda decided to go into hiding in October of 1993. She and her boys moved to a place called McCordsville, Indiana, which is another suburb of Indianapolis. This was only around a 17-minute drive from Fisher's where she was being followed, but the house, the phone, and the utilities were in her parents' name, and the school bus that dropped off her boys dropped them off at a church friend's house every day. But she still felt followed. She never knew exactly who was following her, but it was more than likely detectives, considering they had already thought she had something to hide. And one of the detectives once said that Linda would probably take her children to meet with Richard eventually, so they probably were keeping a close eye on her. In 1995, Linda had officially divorced Richard and detectives backed off due to lack of evidence. Linda had some rough years, saying she leaned on her faith in Christianity heavily in this time. She said it was what got her and her boys through all of this. 10 years after Richard's disappearance, in 2003, he was officially declared dead. Linda could finally move on and close this chapter. She had already went through years of heartbreak, and this was a way for her to seal the pain and move forward. She eventually remarried and moved on with her life. When 13 years later, in 2016, she got the most shocking call of her life. In July of 2016, 23 years after her husband Richard had gone missing, Linda gets a call from an unknown number and lets it go to voicemail. Little did she know, what was on that voicemail was something that would change everything that everyone thought they knew about Richard's disappearance. Linda checked the voicemail, and it ended up being a detective named Anthony Cardillo at the Pasco County Sheriff's Department in Florida. He was asking Linda to give him a call back. But why would detectives in Florida be calling her? Linda was very confused. Nervously, Linda gives Detective Cardillo a call back. When the detective answered the phone, he asked her if she knew a man named Richard Hoagland. As she heard this, she didn't know what to say at first. She was taken aback by this question. That was a name she was not expecting to hear. She eventually composes herself and tells the detective it's her ex-husband. The detective then tells her the last thing she thought she would ever hear. He says, "We have him in custody." Not even being able to fully process what she was hearing, Linda went through an intense wave of emotions. I mean, she just spent the last 23 years believing Richard was either dead or gone forever, and suddenly this was just sprung onto her. But how was Richard still alive? Why was Richard in Florida? Why was Richard arrested? Why did he leave her and the boys all those years ago? Linda had so many questions, and they were about to be answered after living through 23 years of an emotional roller coaster. Finally, she could figure out the truth of what really happened. After Richard had talked to his wife Linda on the phone for the last time on February 15th, 1993, and left his vehicle abandoned at the Indianapolis International Airport, he had somehow made his way to Port St. Lucie, Florida. It's not exactly clear how, but authorities think it was a bus, train, or hitchhiking a ride, considering there were no flight or rental car paper trails. When Richard arrived to Port St. Lucie, he met a man named Edward Szymanski and started renting an efficiency apartment inside of his home. It's not exactly clear how they met, but it's assumed Richard saw an ad in the paper. Edward was grateful when Richard had rented the apartment from him. Edward was lonely and depressed because he had just lost his son named Terry Szymanski, who was 33 years old and was a commercial fisherman. He died in a fatal boating accident a couple of years prior in 1991 where he had sadly drowned. Edward started pouring his heart out to Richard. He just really needed someone to talk to, and Richard was willing to listen. Richard would listen to all kinds of stories about Edward's son Terry and his adventures as a commercial fisherman. This really helped Edward grieve. Edward really thought Richard had turned into a good friend, but little did he know what Richard was capable of. After hearing all of these stories about Edward's son Terry that had passed away, Richard had a bright idea. An idea that could get him out of the mess that he was in. A heartless extra layer of betrayal that no one had expected. After searching around Edward's home that he was renting a room in, Richard happened to find Terry Szymanski's death certificate. After finding his death certificate, he applied for a birth certificate under Terry's name. After he received a new birth certificate, he applied for a new ID. And just like that, Richard Hoagland became Terry Szymanski. That's right, this man had an old man rent a room to him and confide in him, and had the gall to steal this man's dead son's identity. All this right after leaving his wife and his sons in huge financial debt. Not a good look, to say the least. After stealing Terry Szymanski's identity, Richard moves on living his life as Terry. He got into real estate and sometimes commercial fishing. He met a woman named Mary Hickman, married her, and had another son with her. They bought a house together in Zephyr Hills, Florida. He even got a pilot's license under the name Terry Szymanski. He blended into society, making friends and maintaining a good reputation. His wife Mary had no idea that he was living under a stolen identity, and the last almost 20 years of her life had been a lie. Richard was careful not to do anything that required fingerprints or background checks. He did things like avoided international travel and anything that might require deeper identity verification. Richard was good at being Terry, and no one suspected a thing. That's until 2016, when a simple web search brought an end to Richard's lies and secret double life. In 2016, so 23 years after Richard had ran away, moved to Florida, and stolen Terry Szymanski's identity, the Szymanski family started looking on Ancestry.com to look into the family history for a genealogy project. This is when the nephew of Terry Szymanski found something that didn't make any sense. While he was doing his research, he discovered that his Uncle Terry had died in a boating accident in 1991. But something didn't make any sense though. The family tree said that his Uncle Terry was married in 1993, 2 years after his death. The Szymanski family decided they needed to call the police, so that's what they did. They called and made a stolen identity report, and this triggered police to start investigating. Detective Anthony Cardillo from Pasco County, Florida, was the man who took on the job. After Detective Cardillo confirmed that Terry Szymanski was for sure verified dead, he dug a little deeper and discovered tons of irregularities. He discovered that Terry had only started appearing in public records after 1993, which raised some red flags. This is when Detective Cardillo decided to pay Terry a visit to his home. He caught him by surprise and truly blindsided him. The detective asked what his name was, and he said Terry. He even provided the detective with a driver's license and all the right information on it. But little did he know, Detective Cardillo had something up his sleeve. After Richard was claiming to be Terry over and over again with Detective Cardillo, The detective finally pulled out a copy of Terry Szymanski's death certificate, and at this point, Richard knew he was caught. He thought he would get away with this and had moved on with his life, all for it to be exposed with a simple internet search and everything to come tumbling down. He finally admitted that his real name was Richard Hoagland. This is when detectives arrested him and took him in for identity fraud. This is what led to Detective Cardillo calling Linda, now Linda Eisler, in July of 2016. This was a surreal moment for everyone involved, including his new family. His new wife and son had no idea of his past life. Also, they had went by the last name Szymanski. Just imagine you live your whole life thinking this is your dad and thinking that's your last name, and your whole world being shattered in an instant. Truly devastating for both families this man started. Obviously, his new wife's over 20 years of marriage was destroyed. She had no clue and started cooperating with detectives right away. His new son, in shock, came to the police station to see him, looking at his father that was his own flesh and blood, but with a name Szymanski that was not his. The emotions felt in that moment were between anger and sadness. Richard would only tell detectives that the reason why he did this was because he had family issues with his wife and his children. Matthew Hoagland, his son from his first marriage he ran away from, said he thought he got caught up with the wrong people and got carried away over his head in something. When Richard was arrested, his son Douglas was 29 years old and serving a prison sentence. He saw his dad's mugshot on TV while he was in the Indiana State Prison. He was in there for possession of a controlled substance and was expected to get out later that month. You see, since 2006, Douglas had been in and out of jail and served a few prison sentences. They were all mostly drug-related charges, which isn't surprising considering the childhood trauma he experienced. Douglas said at a very young age he felt like that he had lost a person that he thought loved him. He wondered what was wrong with him for someone just to walk away. He started turning to anger at a young age, lashing out. This eventually led to light drug use and then full-blown addiction. He said he stopped maturing as a person and never let go of the past that haunted him. He had extremely low self-esteem, and the drugs helped him get his confidence back because he really just felt less than he really was. While in prison, Douglas wrote a letter to his father Richard while he was in the Pasco County Jail. He asked his father why. What was so bad that he had to disappear? He told his father it had been 23 years since the day he had left, and it was still fresh on everyone's minds. But Douglas had a big heart and forgave his father. He told his father that he hoped he had peace, and even though he wasn't happy with how he left their family, he forgives him. Douglas's older brother Matthew, while having his issues, grew up and took the straight and narrow, having a wife and a family. He says the impact of his dad's actions have affected them all. He says they all still deal with it and carry it on a daily basis. Richard didn't try to fight this in court. He knew he was caught red-handed. He pled guilty to identity fraud and received 2 years in prison in Florida. He served most of that time and was released in April of 2018. After his release, he moved back to Indiana. This is where Linda sued him for all those years of unpaid child support. He had to be back in court a month after his return and face the family he had abandoned over 2 decades earlier. The reunion in court was an awkward affair. I mean, they hadn't seen each other in literally 25 years. Words between them were sparse. On May 10th, 2018, the day of the hearing, it was Matthew's 35th birthday. Richard approached him and wished him a happy birthday, but Matthew told him it wasn't the time or the place. When Richard showed up to court, his clothes stood out. He wore old shoes, pants, and a polo that looked like it came from the thrift store. Everyone in the court thought it was an act from an already proven con artist. They said they thought it was an act to attempt to look broke. The judge didn't buy any of it and wrote a detailed 11-page ruling saying that it was clear Richard was not living in poverty. The judge said he obtained a comfortable lifestyle, had remarried and had children, and obtained a pilot's license, and owned at least one airplane that was acquired for personal use. The judge initially ordered Richard to pay $1.8 million in back child support. The judge arrived at this amount by using the maximum allowable interest occurred of 18% a year. They also were planning on filing another lawsuit to attempt to collect $40,000 in attorney fees, but I can't find an update on that. Since this, Richard has been out of the public eye. The families, while heartbroken, went on with their lives. Let's hope they all find the peace that they need in life. This devastated 3 different families, so there's a lot of trauma to heal. It may never go away, but with them having each other and leaning on things like their faith, time will definitely heal some wounds, but there will always be scars left behind. That's it for the story of Richard Hoagland, one of the craziest and saddest cases of a missing person and stolen identity ever. It's truly insane how someone can be capable of such painful, betraying, narcissistic behavior. None of those families deserved any of this. I hope somewhere deep down in that man's mind, he has some remorse or guilt, but I severely doubt it. So what do you think about this story? Do you think he got the prison time he deserved? Do you think it was fair to make him pay almost $2 million in child support? Also, do you have any stories you would like to share with me? You can leave a comment below or message me at contact@dredgerreality.com. Thanks so much for watching, and please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any reality we've dredged up for you. I'll see you next time with some more crazy facts, mysteries, and scary stories dredged from reality.